Tourism represents 13.8% of the world's gross domestic product. That's a huge proportion, as you know as well. Fundamentally important to the economy of the world. And globally, tourism represents 3.6% of jobs. Of course, as you have more connectivity, you have the economic development, which is linked. And of course, aviation plays a key part in that overall aspect. And of course, that's why we're here in terms of a lot of the discussions at the AGM as well. When you look at it in terms of passenger numbers, and by the way, I think in your handouts, for those of you that collected the handout, the figures on the chart are not correct. The figures on this chart are correct. We're looking at a growth of around 3.5% per annum in terms of passenger volumes. And it's not just tourism, it's business, it's visiting friends and family. All of these are essential components in terms of traffic growth. And so if we're looking at the situation normal scale, we're looking at doubling passenger traffic almost in 20 years. And of course, there's different scenarios which you've seen previously as well. There's the higher growth scenario where there is a more liberalized environment and facilitating more journeys and greater economic development. And there's also the more protectionist environment as well, where we'd see more lesser growth than this baseline scenario you see here. Now, when we look at these passenger forecasts and in terms of the development itself, you're looking at the economic analysis. What we don't always take into account is some of the impediments that might incur in terms of those passengers really being able to travel itself. So there's two things we can look at. One is in terms of the basic facilitation of being able to travel itself. So if we look at visa processes can be cumbersome, they can be expensive, they are fragmented. And that could also impede the ability of passengers to travel. So and particularly when we look at emerging economies, so if we look at the Asia, Africa, Latin America, Middle East, these are places, of course, where we have developing economies, but also these are also the areas where the nationals typically need visas to travel. So this can be quite an impediment as well, going forward as well. If we really want to facilitate the ability of the willing public to travel, then we need to be able to ensure that this process of visas is minimized as much as possible. The other aspect which you have heard about through different presentations is about the airport capacity situation itself. Now, based on our assessment, when we look at the top 100 airports, what we see is that all but 4 of those airports require some form of infrastructure upgrade, a major infrastructure upgrade, either in terminal or airside over the next 10 years. And quite a few of those airports already have some type of capacity constraint in one of those 2 areas. So if we're looking at a doubling of passenger traffic, we're not really expecting, based on the current pace of infrastructure build, to put it simply, we're not looking at doubling the number of airports, that's for sure. But can we really think that we're going to double the airport capacity available where the markets require? And I think that's a big question which needs to be addressed overall itself. And so, I mean, when we've looked at it, what we have understood is if airport development continues at its current pace, and if the modularities of the airport design and build continues as they are, we are not going to be able to double the capacity as is. And there's other restrictions to that as well, including planning restrictions and other aspects as well. So we need to think about things in a slightly different way. And that really involves looking at the broader aspect in terms of the journey itself. So it's clearly not just about being able to accommodate the passengers in terms of the flights themselves, it's about the end-to-end journey and facilitating the actual journey itself, being able to improve the passenger processing efficiency for the end-to-end journey, and reducing the barriers to travel, which I explained earlier, for example, with the visas and so on. So all of these things have to be actually developed in parallel if we're going to make it work in terms of the available capacity. Some of the solutions which you have seen through different presentations, etc., and you will be familiar with many of these things, because IATA and other organizations have been progressing on various solutions, etc., mainly to alleviate some of the cumbersome processes at the airport side. You know the scenario where you have to present your ticket, your boarding pass and your passport at different places at the airport. Essentially, set different times. You're starting and stopping, queuing various times, but you're showing the same information. And so, of course, there have been good initiatives in terms of increasing automation for that journey itself. Self-check-in is very well established in many places. Self-backdrop, immigration, automatic boarding controls, self-boarding, etc. There's also increasing use of advanced screening technologies using advanced passenger information as well. And as you know, we've been advocating for one-stop security, trying to make progress on that, so states can recognize each other's security processes to avoid duplicative measures during transit and transfer as well. And also moving towards a more risk-based system as well, so that security screening can be done based on the assessed level of risk. So all these initiatives are being progressed in different places, but they are individual initiatives. And one thing I want to come back to during this presentation is, if we're going to accommodate the traffic levels which we're talking about itself, implementing these initiatives piecemeal is not really going to provide a solution either. We need a much more of an integrated vision as well as to how this can be done. Let's go back a little bit as well. Let's go back to the big issue in terms of visas. So I think this statistic here is fundamentally important in understanding the problem which we have. So two-thirds of the world's population requires a visa to travel before departure. So if we really are going to accommodate and facilitate the travel of the traffic growth we're looking at, this situation really needs to be addressed and resolved to the furthest extent possible itself. Interesting enough, and actually when you think about it, it's not so surprising, but those emerging economies, they're the ones which are more open. So flying to those destinations, you may not need a visa in itself, but conversely, on the flip side of the coin, it's those economies and their nationals that require visas to travel, going to other places as well. So it's an unfortunate situation because we want to expedite the actual traffic from the developing economies as well. Alleviate the visa situation to the maximum extent possible in terms of facilitating processes, maybe through a trusted framework type environment where governments can access the right information. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as well as we go forward. And actually that moves me on to the open border strategy itself. Because what we're looking to do is to really progress on 4 main areas in trying to ensure that this ready-to-travel situation is facilitated as much as possible without cumbersome processes. And one of the things, of course, we need to look at, as I just described, is in terms of the visa process itself. So trying to remove the unnecessary travel restrictions through the visa process. If we can move to a situation where the governments can actually access the necessary information through a trusted framework. And if you're thinking about what is a trusted framework, if I could just draw an analogy, if you think about the credit card systems, for example, and how they can validate the information which is transferred over through different countries, etc. It doesn't matter where you are, it can still be processed. That's an example of a trusted framework. And we're working with the organization, which is the Open Identity Exchange Association, which is basically a not-for-profit organization for businesses that deal with these sorts of issues. And we're looking to see what can be standardized in terms of a framework which could be used by governments, etc. as well. One very important aspect, I think, that is in trying to understand how we can try to remove the visa situation, fragmented visa situation wherever possible. Another one is in terms of facilitation, in terms of bilateral and multilateral agreements in terms of trade, of course, as well. Now, free trade is very important in terms of expediting traffic as well and stimulating the economic environment. Now, we know, of course, with basic various other developments, it is an uphill struggle in some places, but it's something that we must advocate going forward as an industry as well. So that's something we'll be pushing on. And the third area is in terms of the registered traveller programs. And there are so many different traveller programs across the world, of course, as well. And if we can link these together and try and find ways in which there is commonality and where you can cross-use the different traveller programs, that will really help on various aspects. First of all, it will be a key component in terms of the risk-based security measures. So you can reduce the level of screening required because you have information. And also, if you can use cross-border travel programs, it also improves the actual use and the efficiency of the overall systems itself. The US-Canada example is a key example of that as well. And by the way, in terms of passengers feeling comfortable about using that sort of information, when we do our global passenger survey, we find that 75% of those passengers polled say that they are comfortable with using that information for these sorts of purposes. So I think that's a good proxy in terms of going forward as well. And by definition, of course, the registered traveller programs are opt-in anyway, so it's something which we need to really find ways in which we can increase the commonality for. And the fourth area is in terms of API, Advanced Passenger Information, and the ability to use that more efficiently and more effectively as well. So airlines, of course, through their systems, actually have spent millions making sure that the information is available to governments. It's not always used in the right way, and it's certainly not shared in the right way as well. And of course, what we want to do is move towards a more interactive API environment, so that that clearance as to whether to fly or not to fly is given before boarding, as opposed to when the passenger arrives on arrival, etc. as well. So there's a lot of things which still need to be done. While the information is around, it needs to be processed at the right time, it needs to be shared by the right constituents, and it needs to be available to airlines if they know how to take action as well at the right time as well. So these are the sorts of things which we need to really improve our advocacy on in those four areas to try and ensure that we can provide the right capabilities going forward as well. And if we look at, again, looking at the visa situation, and if we look at some of the facts and figures, and this is work that's been done by WTO and the World Travel and Tourism Council. For APAC, we're looking at 89 billion in terms of benefits, and also the creation of 2.6 million extra jobs. For ASEAN, 12 million and 654,000 extra jobs. And if we look on a global level in terms of the G20 economies, 206 billion in terms of additional import, and also 5 billion jobs. So huge benefits there to be created. But it's by no means an easy task. It's something that requires significant advocacy on working with states overall to try and make sure that we can move towards this situation itself. So where are we today in terms of recap? Well, as you've heard, we're lacking the global approach in terms of facilitation. First of all, let me just emphasize again, the traffic growth we're projecting, that it does require facilitation in terms of some areas, the visa situation, the capacity situation as well. There is a lack of a global approach overall. Data collection, necessary data collection is mandatory. You have two UN resolutions, there's 2178, which is for collection on the advanced passenger information. So states are encouraged and required to set up systems to collect API requirements. And then you also have UN Resolution 2396, which is for passenger name and number collection as well. So slowly the states are starting to develop those capabilities and require that information. Of course, one of the other things we need to make sure is that is done in a harmonized way as well. And also that the information is used in the right way as well by governments, because that's not still the case as you read. And we need to be able to make sure that the patchwork of security systems are used most effectively and try to use the available information as much as possible. Now, if we can progress on those aspects, if we can facilitate the environment where the ready-to-fly situation is facilitated as much as possible, what we then need to do is to make sure that the journey on the ground and the capacity on the ground is available to actually allow that flow of traffic itself. And so that's when we move on to some of the other aspects we've been looking at. Now, I mentioned some of the initiatives that we've already been progressing, of course, in terms of check-in and automated border control and so on. You're familiar with all of those things. But what we've started to look at in IATA, together with ACI actually, is trying to understand what could really be done if we pull together all of the myriad of initiatives in terms of flow on the ground itself. If we pull all of these things together, what can really be done and what would the journey look like itself? And how much, the aim of all of this is to understand how much facilitation, how much capacity can we really accommodate using the sort of capacity we're going to see in terms of airports, etc. So one of the main objectives is to understand how much processing, for example, for the passenger, can be done before you get to the airport itself. Why do you have to wait till you get to the airport central processor to be processed as a passenger, when a lot of the information can be used by different agencies, different authorities to process you while you're on your journey itself, or even from home itself? And you heard some of that already from the presentation yesterday, if you remember, where we had not quite the Hyperloop system, but the sort of mock mini Hyperloop idea. You know, the basic premise of that is also, can you have a distributed airport system? So you don't have one central funnel to process everything, but processing can be done in terms of check-in, in terms of immigration, in terms of security, to different levels, as far as possible before you get to the airport terminal itself. And that's the environment we'd like to move to, and I say we're working with ACI on that as well. And to think about it in a slightly different way as well, can we get to a situation whereby if you have an entry gate, say in a city, which is like a node for the airport itself, can you consider yourself to be processed to the extent where you are effectively airside as soon as you enter that city node itself? Why do you have to wait till you get to the airport environment to be classified as being airside? And that's the situation we would like to get to itself. And that would certainly facilitate in terms of traffic accommodation and facilitation as well. Now, secondly, another aspect is when you are at the airport, can you be processed in a seamless way, so you're not doing the start and stop and the queuing aspect, showing the same documentation as well. And this is really where the biometrics measure comes in as well. So can you have a token of identification which can be used to track your progress through different nodes at the airport, and also through the journey as well, so that you can just be checked as being the passenger which is registered to fly basically for that journey itself. And then finally, to make all of this work, which is the third area on this, is the interactive decision making. So can there be a data backbone that links all of this together? And there has to be. To make this all work, there has to be a data backbone that links all this together, so that the different components of whichever aspect we're looking at, be it security or customs control or whatever aspect it is, can tap into that data backbone and retrieve the information itself. So those are the three main areas we're looking at to see how we can better facilitate traffic itself. There is a detailed website on this program, and by the way, next is New Experience Travel Technologies. We should actually put up the website, we should give the website details as well. Anyway, so it's next at IATA, next.iata.org, and we'll send the details to you. What is interesting is, on this website, what we have done is we've defined what that future journey could look like. So we've taken the passenger journey and we've done a step-by-step description in terms of what that future journey could look like itself for the passenger, for throughout the ground aspects. Same for cargo, same for baggage, and also for aircraft turnaround as well. So we've kind of defined what that future environment needs to look like itself. And now it's really a question of trying to understand how we can push on the different initiatives to make this work. But again, when we talk about next, we're not really looking at defining a whole new concept. This is really making the best use of the different initiatives which have been progressed throughout the world already. One idea is fundamentally important to the next program, and it's also fundamentally important to what I spoke about in terms of the biometrics aspect and the facilitation of seamless flow, walk-through type environment on the airport itself. You've heard about it yesterday as well through the WTTC as well. We can move to a situation where the passenger is verified in terms of the identity, and there is a token, there's a biometric which is associated with the passenger. That can then flow with the passenger through the different stages of the journey. And the actual checking of that biometric doesn't even have to require any contact itself. There's different technologies that allow contactless verification as well. And that would really alleviate some of the situations we see as well. Now this is, one idea is seen as a great opportunity in terms of going forward. And there's increasing numbers of airports which are looking at this now in terms of trials. And we're really at the trial and verification stage itself. So Bangalore in India is looking at this as well. Heathrow is very evidently looking at this, and actually Heathrow have a much more broader data transformation program as well. Interestingly enough, conversely to what you heard yesterday, there is an end-to-end trial on a return trip which is being validated, and that's between Dubai and Gatwick. So that the One ID aspect is being looked at from Gatwick to Dubai and back as well. And that's a really interesting aspect as well. And it's progressing quite well actually. And even Sydney here is looking at the One ID program as well. So what we're doing is we're working with each of these airports, and there's others as well which I haven't described. We're working with each of these airports to really see how we can best look at the application of One ID. And then what we'll be doing is to develop standards for various places in terms of verification processes as well, and that will allow the common implementation itself, while trying to be technology agnostic as well, of course. So that's fundamental in terms of how we can make this capacity aspect work overall itself. Okay, so I think we can
yeah, open the floor to
we can open the floor to questions, yeah.
Oh, thanks a lot. Adrian Schofield of Aviation Week. Hey, I'm just wondering if you could just run through that bit that you went through a couple of seconds ago about the airports that are trialling the One ID. Was it Bangalore you said, and
Yeah.
and Heathrow? Also, is that the Dubai Gatwick one? Is that an IATA trial?
Yeah, IATA is involved in all of these trials, so we're providing input and we're providing advice, and we're monitoring the verifications. The airports which are doing the verification.
I wouldn't call it an IATA trial. IATA is just contributing to the development and input.
I could provide you with a fuller list as well, actually. I do have a list. Yeah.
Emma Kelly, Asian Aviation. On the wider next programme, I think when it was announced, you were talking about the group of airports to trial aspects of that. So beyond One ID, are there other trials going on in the wider next programme?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Heathrow, we're doing a much more broader program in terms of data. And what we're looking to do there is to expand a concept called airport collaborative decision making, and see if we can expand that out into the terminal areas as well. So right now it's only a concept which is used basically airside, and what we're looking to do is to see if we can expand that out into the terminal areas, so there is visibility in terms of where passengers are, and that would then we can understand how that actually impacts the actual takeoff time for the aircraft as well.
So is that actually going on now?
It's going on now. Yeah.
How long has that been?
It's been going on for the last couple of years, basically.
Oh.
Yeah, and then we've been working closer with them recently as well. And we're working with Bangalore on One ID and the broader application of One ID. And we're working with Shenzhen Airport in China. And there we're doing some pretty innovative work in terms of use of robotics and automation.
Sorry, where was that?
Shenzhen.
Hi. Excuse me. Good morning. I wanted to go back a little bit to you were talked a little earlier about the security process and sort of defining where people can be cleared and identified as airside, and moving that further and further away from the gate or from the airplane. And sort of there's clearly some value in that, but there's also a lot of challenges at this point. There's things you can't have with you when you're considered airside, the security screening process that makes it inconvenient, especially if you have longer time periods to go before your flight. Like I can't bring my bottle of water or whatever. That's a simple example, but there's a lot more to it than that. Just a lot of those other things. I understand the value to the airline potentially, but is it really necessarily good news for the passengers to be cleared and 6 hours before travel now you're considered airside as opposed to just when you get to that process? How do you balance those, the good and the bad there?
Yeah, I think that's something we need to look into. But I don't think there'd be a situation where you would only enter city gates and you would be airside. That's the only option. I think that you'd have a combination of options. So you could go to the airport to be processed in the normal way as well, but have the option to be able to enter into a gate where you have some of the clearance already done itself. Yeah. It's more the analogy itself as opposed to a requirement. Yes, sorry.
Please only go and then go to Marissa.
Okay. Malcolm Ginsberg, Business Time News London. I may not be right up to date on all this city centre check-in, but certainly it was in Hong Kong, and how's that working? But then you've got the security aspect. Once you've got rid of your bags and you've checked in, then you're still landside. And Heathrow tried this at Paddington some years ago, and it just didn't work because people weren't using the facility.
Yeah, right, and also Gatwick as well to some extent, I think, right? So, yeah, exactly, yeah. So I mean, this has been trialed quite some years back. Hong Kong has been established for quite some time as well, but I think there is an acknowledgement that we need to find some ways in doing more, and there's probably a broader understanding that wherever possible if we can share data and get that clearance done, the passengers would like to see that capability as well.
Because if you do take Heathrow, for example, and you check in somewhere, it's got then you're going to have a security area on the train, and the complications of getting out of the station. I just can't see.
No, I think exactly. And if you look at it in terms of the common infrastructure as we have right now, yes, absolutely, that transition is quite difficult itself. But there are different concepts being trialed by different companies as to how you can have this type of capability itself. So it would be more of a situation where you can see how you can migrate the new technologies, the new capabilities in the future environment itself.
I mean, presumably there are stats available for where people are originating for the airport, whether from the city or whether from the rural community.
Exactly, and you have to do the analysis to see whether it's actually worthwhile to try and progress some of these initiatives. Yeah.
Marissa?
It's a two-part question regarding growth constraints, as you described them. The first part has to do with, despite the benefits of extending the network, the connectivity, as you suggest, there's also a lot of underused airports in nearby catchment areas. Is it something that you're with the fleet planning that goes on, I know that that's like an individual member issue, but is it something that's in discussion in terms of looking to optimize the use of existing infrastructure that may be nearby? One example, I heard Düsseldorf Airport complain to me one time that, they would have loved to have taken some traffic from Frankfurt, but Lufthansa's, made them invest for nothing. Not in those exact words, but that was the gist of it. So, I mean, there is a lot of underused capacity there. Does that factor into the growth? And the second part of it is, even if you factor that, how much of a hit will ATC be to restricting growth in the future? The ATC constraints. So, sorry, that's long.
Yeah. Firstly, in terms of traffic, the traffic is basically defined by where the passenger and cargo markets require that traffic itself, and that's what the airlines will accommodate. So if there is airport capacity which is not aligned to where that traffic is required, then the traffic is not going to move there itself. That's not going to happen, and it's certainly not going to be the right way to do it either. But in some cases, there might be opportunities to have some intermodal linkages between airports as well. And if you see some of the aspects which are progressed in China, that's the type of idea which has been progressed quite well as well. So that can be looked into for certain situations, for sure. Yeah. That's the age-old question as to whether air traffic capacity will be able to accommodate the actual growth itself as well. So we have a parallel program which is not described here, where we're trying to alleviate some of the bottlenecks we always see in terms of air traffic control, working with governments, designing their overall airspace capacity plans, and trying to work out ways in which we can understand how best we can accommodate the future traffic itself. Yes, please.
Oh, hello, it's Jordan Chong from Australian Aviation Magazine. I wanted to ask about the transit security point in your presentation. Just wondering if the not needing to clear security again at the transit point What are the constraints there? Is it sort of the airport infrastructure layer, or is it the government regulations or the government rules for those particular countries? And also, just wondering, I understand that when Singapore Airlines had a Wellington, Canberra, Singapore rotation, the transit passengers in Canberra did not have to clear security because there was a recognition of each other's security arrangements. Is that sort of the thing that you're looking for to improve the security process at transit? If you could talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the specific example you gave. I don't know, I'll speak to my colleague in a bit, but what we're looking at in terms of the transfer area itself is to get to a situation whereby as a passenger will be security cleared on departure. Is there a capability to recognize that security clearance from that stage so that the transfer stage doesn't require the same assessment once again? That's what we're calling one-stop security itself. The specific example, Vinup, do you know anything about that? Sorry, my colleague Vinup in the back there.
No, I'm just asking, what are the constraints?
Yeah, it's basically that itself, right?
It's government, or is it?
It's basically the ability to. Well, it's a combination of two. The major one which we want to facilitate is the idea of the one-stop security, so you don't have to do the security clearance once again itself. So the more you can facilitate that, the more governments can be assured that the first step of security is as good as they require, then you don't have to redo the process over again. So that's the major aspect in terms of the facilitation process we want to progress. There are issues in terms of capacity at different airports, but this is consistent with the overall aspect of capacity development across airports itself as well, going forward. Did you have a comment?
We'll just take the last two questions now. There's another briefing at 8:30. Is that correct?
Just one more question on Next. Is this a coordinated industry approach? Obviously you're working with ACI, but other organisations, people like CETA, are also doing similar things. Is that feeding into the Next project?
Yeah, so what we're finding is we started this off in partnership with ACI, as you know. We've got 6 airports enrolled already as key members of the program. But we also have quite a number of engineering firms and architects and technology providers and consultants actually are also very keen to work with us. And we're coordinating with our broader industry. So I think as we go forward, what we're going to do is we're going to be working as more of an umbrella project, coordinating the different initiatives, including what CETA is doing as well. So we are coordinating with CETA itself. I wouldn't say CETA is an active partner, but we hope to get to that situation.
Just one more. I wonder if you can give some examples of where around the world the industry has had some success in advocating for more liberalised visa arrangements.
Yes. Young man in that. Vinup from our regional office will provide some examples on that. I think it's.
Sorry, so I'm Vinup Goyal. I'm the Regional Director for Airports and External Relations for Asia-Pac. So one of the examples for liberalized visa regimes, as mentioned. So just 2 things to clarify, if I may add on to Hemant's comments. We are not questioning the ability of airlines, of governments, to choose who they allow into the country. But it's a matter of 2 things. How do you make the visa process, the process of issuing the visa simpler? So rather than visiting an embassy 3 times to get your visa, can it be done online and electronically? And once you have that electronic data, can that be linked to your check-in and travel facilitation process that Hemant talked about to make it seamless so that the government can check before the person departs whether this person has the right visa or not, which can't be done with a paper visa and all that. So that's one aspect. And if you look at it from an APEC viewpoint, they have an APEC business travel card, which is essentially a liberalized visa program among the APEC countries. So that's one example where that has been in place for a number of years.
Okay, just one final question because this safety.
Related to this visa question, which perhaps the IATA can look into, with ESTA, it's working very well as far as I can see, and you automatically know when you've got it, and it's actually a stamp, I think, in your passport. With the Australians, it seems that you get a visa, which is free, provided you do it in advance, but it's not stamped on your passport. You've got no idea that you've actually got it. And when it runs out, my understanding is they don't tell you that it's run out. So I've got a visa, which I got about 4 months ago, and I've no idea how long it's going on for. Perhaps that's something you can look into.
Yeah. More transparency in terms of the validity times, yeah. We've seen that.
Thank you everybody for your time. It's the safety briefing. Thank you.